days of Dawntrail are coming to an end. Almost 2 years now, and it's been a host to a lot of controversy, one of the bigger player fallouts we've seen in the game, and some of the weakest story writing we've seen in the series. So, considering that, what did I think of Dawntrail? Dawntrail was good. Alright, video's done. Go home. Oh, you want me to elaborate. Alright, fine. I will be discussing the story of Dawntrail. There will be spoilers, so this is your only warning. Let's be clear. Dawntrail is not without flaw. Certainly not at all. And there was a point in its play cycle where I may have even said it was a bad expansion. But as I've played through most of the content we have available, I've definitely come around to the expansion as a whole, and Dawntrail has some of my favorite moments in the game's history. It doesn't beat out the storytelling of Shadowbringers or Endwalker by any metric, but I will forever remember that moment we first walk into the last room of the Skydeep Cenote. But anyway, let's start out with some of the bad. Dawntrail's story pacing, let's be honest, it leaves a lot to be desired. In the early game, and this to be fair is kind of a problem with every expansion to an extent, we spend so much time kind of just doing nothing and talking to people, and unfortunately for Dawntrail, because everything that we had previously been through, the stakes were so low. You know, when you compare it to something like Aldisade's introduction in Shadowbringers, man, the difference. And also, we just don't really spend that much time with the characters that we already care about. Of course, I'm referring to the Scions, but I also think that Kona is potentially a much more interesting character than Wuk Lamat. And to be clear, I don't dislike her. I'm not attacking her. I'll get to that. It does begin to hit its stride about the midway point. Like I said, that first time walking into the final room of the Skydeep Cenote, if you had watched my stream, I genuinely had to stop and I was in awe. It is an incredible reveal. I feel like we spent a little bit too much time in Shalawani, but after that point, it's really good for the rest of the base game. The pacing then jumps off a cliff for a couple of patches. I rarely ever tune out completely, but even I was like, who cares, man, when we were fighting that T-Rex Vidral. But then, as we finally start moving into the lead up to Evercold, I am loving the direction that we're going in. I'm genuinely sad that the Lalafels of Treno are probably going to be relegated to characters that we never talk to again, because I love them. They do have a connection to Kryl, so maybe they will bring them back, but who knows, we'll see. I think my biggest critique about the early game is that they didn't really deliver on the promise that we were sold with the game's premise. We weren't really pitted against the other Scions like we were told. We actually spent more time working with them than against them. And where the hell is Justinian? I really wanted him to show up in the Arcadion because it would have been hilarious. I don't know if it would have been possible with the game's coding, but if I could have designed the early game of Dawntrail, I would have allowed the players to choose which candidate to side with, and then have them show off the other side of the story through cutscenes and instance fights as the Scions, as they've done in the past. And as for the first couple patches, it felt directionless until we really started getting into the world travel stuff. Let's talk about the lioness in the room. Let me preface this again by saying I do not dislike Wuk Lamat. She's not my favorite character, but I'm not one of the people who just despises her. And I know a lot of that distaste is simply on the basis that her voice actress is trans. That doesn't matter to me. The only thing that I care about is performance and the writing, I suppose. And neither of those were perfect. I think the biggest flaw in the writing oftentimes is that Wuk Lamat is involved in scenes where she is just completely out of her depth. And if you don't like the type of character she is, you're just not going to like her on principle, but that's besides the point. I know the point of her being there is that she's supposed to be bridging these two kingdoms together, but a lot of the time she appears in Solution 9, she just seems so out of place, and to a point she overstays her welcome. And that's not a good thing when we're considering that this character is probably not going to be coming back very much after we've spent so much time with her throughout the expansion. And I know part of the point of Dawntrail is that we're supposed to be taking somewhat of a backseat mentor role, but that's not an easy thing to pull off in an MMO. We're the Warrior of Light, one of, if not the most powerful person in the realm, and we're supposed to just sit back and not solve problems? And, you know, fair enough, I can believe that Necron is giving us trouble as an avatar of death, but really? Zoralia? We just finished killing 3 gods like 2 months ago, dude. And obviously we beat them, but like, the stakes have never been lower for us. I'm getting ahead of myself. Regarding Wuk Lamat's vocal performance, I actually think the voice suits her very well, but whether it was an issue with the direction or her level of experience, there are several scenes where Senna is not giving the best performance. We're all thinking of the same one.
Steen, listen to me!
I'm not gonna say anything else on this really, because I'm not trying to be mean here, and I don't need to go over every example of good and bad voice work. And before anybody thinks they need to come after me and defend Senna because of their identity, let me reiterate. That is not a factor for my opinion of her performance. It has literally zero bearing. I didn't even know that was the case until well after the expansion was out. I like the voice overall, I think it suits Wuk Lamat, but the performance was lacking in some scenes. And for the record, I do not have any strong opinions about Senna Briar as a person or the LGBT community at large. You are welcome to discuss or criticize Senna's performance or even their public comments, but I am aware of how many conversations about Senna devolve. My channel is not about that, and I am not trying to welcome that onto my channel, so any inflammatory comments in either direction will be removed. Let's keep things friendly here. A major problem with 7.0 is that in terms of the scale of the threat, most of what we're facing is kind of beneath us. We can't fully take a back seat because it's an MMO, but compared to everything else we faced, Valley Garmanda, Zoralia, and even Sveen aren't much of a threat to us. We're a little bit out of place in the power scaling. At any point, we could have just slapped the shit out of Zoralia and Bakul Jaja, and literally nobody could have stopped us. We fought Gulul Jaja, weakened as he was, one of the strongest guys they know, just for fun. Which brings me to the start of the good points, and something that I wish they had focused on more in the actual story. There are so many parts of our journey in Tuliolal that we're just doing for fun. The Warrior of Light so rarely gets the opportunity to just have fun and relax with a low-stakes adventure on purpose. And this may seem to contrast with my earlier statements about the stakes being low, but let me point out the difference here. We were dragged into the fights against Zoralia and Sveen. We chose to fight Gulul Jaja and the Arcadion. I have a whole section about the Arcadian, so I'm not going to get too deep into that yet. But even from our character's perspective, just so much fun. I wish that during our time in Tuliolal, at least in 7.0, that we had spent more time having fun. I have one more negative thing to say. A big set piece that I think was severely underutilized, the Tyrol Vidral, did not play as much of a part in the story as I would have expected them to. We fought a weakened Valley, and a couple minor ones as dungeon bosses, but I really thought they would be more impactful. And I also thought that was kind of how Astinian would be more involved in the story, or have his own side story, but none of that really happened. It would have been awesome to have a side story where we just go hunting with Astinian. Anyway, back to the good stuff. I enjoy every character introduced in Solution 9, Alexandria, and Treno. Even Calyx is this perfect you little shit type of character to me. And it's funny as hell that they put him in that squirrel plush after we beat him. If the theories are true and he's supposed to represent Ratatoskr, just chef's kiss. Hilarious play by the writers. Sveen is a great character, and I do hope we see more of her as we deal with the crossing between realms. And before I forget to mention it, the zones in Dawntrail are all beautiful, if a little empty. I feel like the total size of each zone could have been condensed by like 10 to 15%, and it would have been perfect. Solution 9 and Living Memory are two of my favorite zones in the game. I will just go to Solution 9 and leave it playing in the background for noise. And Living Memory is just such a beautiful area. The music reminds me of Traverse Town for Kingdom Hearts. Even after the release of Evercold, I'm sure I'm going to continue to use the Solution 9 theme as my background track. Unless there's something new that I really like. And there's only 1 or 2 tracks across the entire expansion that I'm not overly fond of. At the start of the expansion, there were complaints that there wasn't anything to do in Dawntrail, but I don't really think that's entirely a fair complaint at the very beginning of the expansion when they haven't come out with anything. That's kind of an issue with every expansion right off the start. Now that almost everything is out, Dawntrail has a lot to do. Whether you like or hate it, you cannot deny that Dawntrail has a lot of different activities. I mean, you have Occult Crescent, Pilgrim's Traverse. Somebody yell at me in the comments to do my PT stream. Merchant's Tale, Arcadion, both Ultimates, more Hildebrand adventures, Cosmic Exploration, and definitely a few more things that I'm forgetting. At the time of posting this video, EU FanFest is just a few weeks away, and while 6 months to the next expansion and minimal new content to get us through may sound daunting, there are no shortage of things to do, especially if you haven't already done them. For those of us who have, just remember, there's nothing locking you here. You're free to come and go when the time comes. Yoshi P has told us to go play different games and come back when you're ready. Unless you own a house, in which case you gotta pay your rent or Square Enix is gonna break your kneecaps and repo your house. Now, let's get into where Dawntrail really shines. Battle content. In my opinion, Dawntrail has had the highest average quality of battle content of any expansion. The dungeons have hit harder, had some of the more creative bosses, and the trials and raids are very consistent. This is the first expansion where I've liked 6 out of 7 of the extreme trials and at least 10 of the raids. And, as I said earlier, Dawntrail is host to possibly my favorite dungeon in the game with Skydeep Cenote. Even with almost daily runs, I haven't gotten tired of the expert dungeons throughout the expansion, which speaks more about their quality than you might think after literally hundreds of runs combined. Shout out Doorman Short. Right now my raid team is farming the wings, and I have yet to really grow tired of any of the fights. The only one I'm not looking forward to Necron, which, we're probably starting that one this week. None of the extremes are that hard, and if you're looking for a good place to start getting into harder content, these ones are perfect. They're fun, engaging, and easy enough to learn both blind or with a guide. And it's more than worth it to farm these mounts. Now for what I've been wanting to talk about the most. Arcadion. I'm not a wrestling fan. At all. I could not care less about WWE or anything like that. These raids are the best in the game. Everything, the story, the presentation, the mechanics, the music, I loved every second of progging and clearing these fights, and I cannot wait for the eventual ultimate. Let's start with the story. The threat of the fighters dying is perfectly fine as a motivator, and the characters are all fun to interact with. It's fantastic that they all have their own personalities, and some of them serve as the face or heel like you would have in real wrestling matches. Having the announcer Matem and his side commentary throughout the fight is a blast, though they shouldn't learn the wrong lesson from this. It works for this setting. Don't try to copy this formula every time. But for me, what really makes the Arcadion stand out amongst all the other raid series is for the first time, we're not dealing with some world-ending threat. We don't have to stop Athena from breaking out of Pandemonium, or as much as I like the Omega raids, he's one of the most powerful entities in the franchise. For the first time, we are simply there to have fun and face strong challengers. We're there because we chose to be. And then, with it all coming together with this cheesy-ass ending in the M12 normal mode, and us becoming the Eternal Grand Champion because nobody else is strong enough to beat us, it's just so much fun. It ends with all the other fighters saying that they're gonna train, and we would expect them to eventually try to challenge our title as part of the Ultimate. Frankly, I don't even care how hard the Ultimate ends up being, as long as it brings back this same level of charm, creativity, and fun, including Matem announcing it. Since every fighter has their own personality, every arena and the themes of the mechanics are presented differently. It is one of the most creative things they've ever done. Even the fights that I think are a little more boring mechanically, like Dancing Green, the presentation alone just brings it up to this insane level. The whole fight is timed with this groovy disco music, the names of the attacks are references to old disco songs, and the whole thing is just this fun, colorful escapade. With the exception of Brute Bomber and Brute Abominator, for obvious reasons, The themes of every fight are all completely unique, and it leads to every fight being memorable. The one that stands out to me the most, and it's not necessarily my favorite of all of them, but it's Honeybee Lovely, because compared to all the others, even including Sugar Riot, it is such a stark contrast. She's this bright, colorful pop star, she's, a queen bee, and it just works. I'm not even sure if I can pick a favorite one aesthetically. It might be Sugar Riot. Although, can someone answer one question for me? Why is this dude a Gundam? What does this have to do with Fenrir? As far as mechanics go, most of them are directly tied to the aesthetics, which definitely enhances the experience, at least for me. I would be remiss if I didn't mention probably this expansion's most infamous mechanic, Sugar Riot's ad phase. That little Yan was the bane of tanks for months. It received merch, both official and from the fanbase. It received art. It alone will probably be talked about for years to come. Even when it resulted in a wipe, it was always funny to see that thing choosing you as its next target. For those that are unaware of why this little thing is such a monster, every one of its auto attacks was a tank buster. And at one point, the off tank has to hold 2 at once, just cycling through mitts and hoping the healers don't lose track of his HP. Another one of my favorite mechanics from Arcadion is the Enrage after M8S. Howling Blade is transformed, he's taken you through this gauntlet of attacks, and then he ends the fight with these successive multi-tower hits, smashing each platform behind you with a final hit until it's just a desperate race between you killing him and him destroying the final platform. It is one of my favorite boss enrages in the game. One of my other favorite enrages comes from M3S, with the Brute Bomber hitting us with this crazy multi-hit finale, going untargetable, climbing up to the top ropes, and then just jumping down and smashing us. It is one of those things where it's so simple, yet the concept of it is so much fun, since most bosses kind of just explode and then you die. There's a lot of mechanics I could talk about, but the last one I think that we have time to talk about, I say as if I'm not the one editing my own video, is probably the hardest mechanic in any Savage. And that would of course be Idyllic Dream from M12S Part 2. Now, I'll be honest, I don't personally feel like I struggled with this mechanic, but I can definitely understand why some people would feel that way. It's a little too complicated for me to explain here, but it's one of those things that's just kind of insane to watch, as the boss shows off a mechanic, shifts you into an alternate reality, shows off another mechanic, shifts you back for that first mechanic to go off, and you have to remember every part of it, as it keeps switching you back and forth and saving mechanics for later. It is crazy. The entire part 2 of M12S is honestly one of my favorite fights in the game. It's complicated, it's hard, it's fast, but it is very learnable. That is what makes good fights for me. I don't really like the fights that are extremely complicated because you just have a million different things to look at, which we often lovingly refer to as debuff vomit. Nor do I really like the ones that are easy to understand, but even a single mistake or lapse in focus is a guaranteed party wipe. That kind of difficulty feels somewhat artificial. 1 or 2 of those in a fight isn't bad, but we've had fights before where that's the entire fight, where every mechanic is a forced body check, and that is not fun. My favorite fights are the ones that find that healthy balance of being hard to understand but learnable, fast-paced and difficult but recoverable with good or smart play. All that being said, I can say I am a very mentally resilient person. It's very infrequent that a fight frustrates me. I'm much more likely to get angry with myself for failing to do something that I know I can, than to be angry with the game or another player. As long as you never listen to my Discord calls while I'm running my daily roulettes. If, by the way, you're someone who has the time, I highly recommend looking for a static, but don't just rush into any group that'll take you. Endeavor to be around people you can talk to and have fun with. It makes the experience so much better when you're progging with friends rather than people who are going to yell at you for the smallest mistakes. I really enjoyed progging this entire raid series, and one of the things that made it such a delight was the music. FF14 almost always has good music, the raid series especially, But what makes Arcadion special is that every boss gets their own unique theme song, like in wrestling. It's their hype song, and it works so well to bring everything together. I am calling out a few members of my raid team. Shame for turning off the music for some of the fights. Your ass is gonna listen to Honeybee Lovely for 3 hours a day, and you're gonna like it! I could sit and talk about every fight's music, but I think I'll stick to my favorites. Starting with Wicked Thunder. It barely misses out on being my favorite due to one song introduced later, and you can probably guess which that is if you play through the series. I have listened to this song on its own for hours. I am a big fan of Rooster Teeth's Ruby, and this song captures the same energy that Casey Lee Williams brings to the Ruby openers. Dancing Green's theme isn't one that I would listen to on its own, but while running the fight, it is one of my favorites with how it times with the mechanics. The entire third tier is fantastic, with Femme Fatale's theme sounding like something Baby Metal would make, the Extremes sound like their theme was ripped straight off a California beach or skate park from 2005. And I've heard a bunch of people say that they use the Tyrant's theme to work out. I should do that. But the one that stands out the most is M12S, and I absolutely love that the entire community has come together to agree this is not Lindworm's song. This is our song. I've listened to this one almost as much as Wicked Thunder's theme. This song just fits perfectly into everything that's happening. Supposedly, this song being made was even a little bit of a miracle. Soken expressed interest in working with Tom Morello. Tom Morello, despite not really knowing anything about Final Fantasy or gaming, was excited by the idea. He reached out to a friend who then reached out to the lead singer Beartooth, and within 48 hours they came together, had this song written, sent it off to Soken, and gave us the Warrior of Light's hype theme. Everything about Arcadion is just fun, and it all leads into the ending where they reveal that all of this was just a setup. The producer was never evil, Matem was in on it, it was just a show for the audience. After explaining all this, the Lindworm then begins to revive, and all of us and the other fighters work together to take down the Lindworm. They reveal the Brute Bomber didn't actually die, and then he gathers everybody's power, sends it to us, and we do this flying dropkick into the Lindworm to finally defeat it. It's all so wonderfully ridiculous, and it goes back to what I was saying about a lot of the events of the expansion were just fun. There is fun to be had in the stakes of a story, of course. Everybody enjoyed going through Shadowbringers and Endwalker, but a lot of these parts of Dawntrail were just fun for the sake of fun, which both in character and out of character we don't get as much. If they keep their trajectory, I'm sure Evercold is going to be an amazing expansion, and despite its flaws, Dawntrail may not be the best expansion, but I think in the end it was a good expansion. I'm going to miss these moments of fun for fun's sake, and I wish Dawntrail had offered more of them, in fact. I expect that Evercold will be returned to what we're used to, in a good way. I think that's about all I have to say, so like the video if you liked it, let me know down in the comments what your thoughts on Dawntrail are and what you're looking forward to in Evercold. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!
It's all over.